this particular report is on really the idea of war crimes, right? And this is the part of the series that we've been kind of talking about. And this is by the Global Investigative Journalism Network, right? And the segment today is on the idea of starvation, right? And this was written by Maggie Michelle or Michael, Maggie Michael, or Maggie Michelle, Maggie Michael, we'll say. But hopefully you guys, I'm really hoping that nobody has direct experience with the idea of starvation, but people should understand that it there's a drastic alteration when it comes down to the psychology of a person when they are actually starving, right? And I don't know if this particular idea or example would be considered a war crime, but I remember reading about this idea of just nuclear bombs in general or nuclear fallout. And there was a family that survived, and just one image that really sticks out is just how this desperate mom was trying to like breastfeed her baby, right? And she was like struggling to really address like her chest, which was already, she was starving, so she was kind of like she was drying up basically, in terms of like just the idea of what healthy people look like versus what unhealthy people look like who are starved. And she was trying to feed the baby with, I mean, essentially just a chest that was definitely not going to be giving a lot of milk, right? And that was probably the most powerful image in terms of actually really realizing how bad things could really get. And just a friendly reminder, if you have babies, or if you know of a family with baby, just recommend to keep dry milk around. Just cases of dry milk, a storage of dry milk is very important. Now, in terms of a quote directly from this particular article by Maggie, or just sourced by Maggie and or whatever, but it's in the article. In 2025, 343 million people faced acute hunger, with the majority, 65% of them, in fragile or conflict-hit countries. According to food security experts, in 2025, Sudan and South Sudan, the Gaza Strip, and Haiti are facing the worst crisis. Okay? And I want you guys to also understand, just because weapons are put away, that doesn't mark the end of a conflict or a struggle for people in war-torn areas, okay? Many times, and for many reasons, residents can be left without food and forced to some serious extremes. And God, I think this idea of starvation really sticks in terms of some of the imagery that I've come into contact with. But this idea of, there was a great famine in China, right? This isn't war particularly, but it does really tell a tale here, because in terms of, we talked about how the psychology can be altered. There was a great famine in China in the late 1950s and early 1960s, right? And there are accounts of towns that are simply just desolate, right? And the tree bark in a lot of these towns, it was scraped clean, right? Man-made lakes were like pumped for the fish. And these fish were not good. I think it was mollusk or something. I forgot what it was. But these fish were not meant to eat. They were not, and they were there, but they were in the pond because they weren't particularly good fish to eat. But they were pumped. The ponds were pumped for these fish. I could only imagine how hard it was to pump the pond and then like to get the fit. That's crazy. But also there were accounts. I think even more crazy is the idea of like grave robbings. People robbing graves and resorting in order to 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 cannibalize the actual the people in the graves. And I mean, it just sounded, that book, there was a book, particularly a book that I read about this particular phenomena. I think it was called I forgot exactly what it's called. I'm not going to say it here. But the idea here is that uh, there were some, it sounded like a hellscape already. And I mean, and there was even an account where like some little girl broke down and like she confessed to eating her little brother. And that was, I mean, it was a hard read. It was a really hard read, I'm not gonna lie. But the idea here is that you can uh, that's the psychology. I think it really portrays the psychology of people in a situation where they are starving, when they are really legitimately starving. And when you want to manipulate or control populations of people, you if you consider like when you're just void of morality and principle, that idea, that impulse, that to use food to get whatever you want, that can be a tremendous factor. And the article discusses like investigating, particularly like all these articles. It's called, the series is called Investigating War Crimes, right? So they're always talking about how to investigate things, and investigating particularly starvation and war can become more important in terms of on the ground individuals in the actual, in the actual fray. You need to understand that there's a lot of room that a lot of these guys can play with, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but uh, the the complications are one thing, but all the international humanitarian law actually defines starvation as depriving civilians of objects that are objects indispensable to the survival of civilians. This now, just a few things that are listed. One, this can be intentional destruction of livelihood, crops and markets, seizing or destroying food stocks, blocking humanitarian aid, cough, Israel cough, forcing masses into displacement and resulting in losing income and livelihood. And this is, man, this is all Israel, I'll say. But apparently, the idea, in terms of the complications and why it's important in terms of this idea, starving combatants isn't a war crime. It's not a war crime, right? So collateral is something that this idea, we talked about the principles when it comes down to war crime. The two primary principles was proportionality, and I think some kind of basically defining combatant. I forget the actual name of the principle itself. But when we talk about the idea of proportionality, this reminds me of that, right? They can play with this concept of proportionality, because when you want to starve combatants, it's a lot easier to say, oh, they were just, in the way. The civilian population that lived there, they were just kind of the collateral damage. And it's interesting because they play with a lot of different things, right? This idea of exaggerating pre-existing conditions or situations to really hide their conscious efforts right? When they have extreme cases, and the courts haven't seen it this particular apparent according to the article, the courts haven't used this particular idea or this particular starvation to prosecute people, which is likely due to the complications involved, and also just the people who are just blatantly ignoring international law. And well, this idea of I think I think we've heard this to kind of an extreme extent, even though apparently like Israel hasn't come out and like really just openly addressed this idea of what's what's going on in their particular crimes. But there was an argument that was saying that basically in Gaza, they were saying that Hamas will use the aid or prevent it from being given to individuals who need it. There's a lot of things wrong with that statement, and more than I have time for to get into right now. But I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. This Maggie, in terms of this particular article, I think is very important because Maggie gives a firm tool sets for people to really start looking into, and we really should at least take a glance at what's valuable in terms of really understanding it, even if you don't plan on visiting a war-torn area, but you can understand what's out there. Now, this, I think, now Gaza keeps coming up with these war crime series, and of course, but Sudan is another reoccurring example, right? And in terms of starvation, in Sudan in particular, there was a civil war, and the government started bombing markets and killing civilians in areas where this other force, this, we'll call them the rebel force, quote unquote, right, would be likely to expand. And it's crazy to think that the government did this, but this idea of, I think it adds another dimension to the complications here, because when we're talking about starvation, a lot of the times we are talking about the people who are in authority doing or having a hand in this, and not wanting people to really shed light on what's going on. And this particular government, they told aid organizations, quote unquote, there are no legitimate needs in this particular war-torn area, which is Darfur, so you should not work there. And if you continue to respond to needs there, you should not expect visas. And this senior aid official asked not to be named, right? Like I said, Maggie provides a lot of information here, and I think it's really great. That's to really just even glance at it. But they also talk about actual defining famine measurements, and I think that's important as well, in terms of actually having a number to put to this particular situation. Definitely things that we need to start to really understand, right? Because in terms of this Renaissance sermon, right, we need to understand something. I think the zodiac sign of Scorpio and its modern ruler, which is the planet of Pluto, really helps shed a tremendous uh, perspective on this particular situation, right? This sign of Scorpio, the zodiac sign, the wheel, right? It's opposite to the sign of Taurus, right? Taurus, which is also the sign that represents food and comfort, among other things, right? But we'll just talk about food and comfort here. And Scorpio can, like, really often be described as the lack of food and comfort in a lot of situations, right? Well, there's a lot of other things, right? Remember, we're zooming in and just talking about a few things. This sign also represents control and manipulation, among other things. Now, when it comes down to here, we're talking about starving populations, so these people can be more susceptible to really the pressures of Scorpio and Pluto. Now, I'll add this idea of, in my opinion, the appeal to morally for simply just morally corrupt militaries who are looking to control populations. It needs to be matched with a very real, concrete fear of international backlash, in terms of that will really replace this idea, that the appeal of controlling these populations, basically that energetic space that is kind of describes their appeal to control and manipulate the populations that we're talking about, really Scorpio, right? Pluto things. This is where the population of people have a new energetic understanding of that particular area, because if they go there, they understand that you can't go there without a consequence. So it almost needs to be that this energetic space needs to be taken with a very serious repercussion that matches that particular idea, or really comes hand in hand with that particular idea of trying to simply starve a population of people. And we really need teeth in terms of this idea of international law, because we lack that. We completely lack that. When we really see a genuine renaissance, I think the U.S. system is going to be set up in such a way, or is set up in such a way to provide the teeth that we're missing now. And we have the populace. We have the constitutions, right? The legality, the words that really describe what we can, or that really describe everything that we really need to do. In a lot of cases, we still need to fix a lot of the verbiage that's been put in, but we do have a lot of the verbiage to be able to say that to be able to project the idea of us being free, right? But we're gonna have to we're gonna have to really force the actions of our government to match us as civilians, right? What guides us? What's important to us? We're gonna have to force our government to correct actions on a world stage, right? And just to give you guys an understanding, JFK believed that this idea of the American Revolution, it didn't begin and end with us, right? Because he really didn't see it as something. He saw this as the beginning of a larger movement, a worldwide understanding, a worldwide revolution that happened, that's taking place, and that needs to take place. And it's it's going to be up to us to really do anything about that.